Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you, gentlemen. Let's see if I can get this to work here. Speaking of divides, Chris, I almost fell on the divide in the partition right there, and that was mildly entertaining for anybody who saw that. Good morning, everyone. And first of all, it is a privilege to speak to this forum today on so many different levels. My name is Greg Johnson, and my comments today will come from a couple of different lenses into the conversation about digital assets in this forum. And currently I serve on the faculty at NYU. I have the honor of being an advisor, an advisory council at the Bretton Woods Committee, lead our tokenization working group efforts, and I could go on and on about the consulting efforts that I provide in the digital asset space. And what I'd like to do, just as for a moment, is maybe to pull the aperture back a little bit and maybe ask everybody to look at the agenda of this incredible two-day forum. And if you do, I don't know how you come away with anything else other than the moment that we're in is everything, everywhere, all at once. And one of the things that I will say, speaking around the world on digital asset topics in higher education, is there were very, very few meetings in crypto that ever, until recently, brought AI into the conversation. Now it's standard operating procedure. Fewer still is a gathering in crypto that would bring conversation about distributed ledger technologies, AI, and our new friend quantum technologies into the conversation. And this forum for years has been bringing those topics together in these convenings, whether they were through webinars or the in-person gatherings. And so I commend the leadership, I commend the representation, because to me those topics are inseparable. I also want to double click on something that one of the speakers mentioned earlier, John Walsh. And he said that this moment that is in equal parts very scary, very challenging, also is exciting and filled with opportunity in front of us. But what John said earlier is he said we need to bring more creativity to the conversation, more imagination to the conversation about what could be possible. And what I'd like to do is maybe to reinforce this moment of unprecedented change in what is theoretically possible, is to take you back maybe 100 years. If we have any parliamentarians or guests here today from England, where my daughters live and work, I would bring you to an imaginary time 100 years ago. Imagine we're at one of the grand old clubs in England on the Pall Mall. Imagine we're in the Reform Club, for those of you that would have been there. If you haven't, picture this room, but with a lot more wood instead of marble, okay? And 100 years ago, if I was there being considered for membership, being sponsored by one of the British members, and we were having a nice discussion over a cigar and a scotch, and eventually I would say to this gentleman, you know, I see a world, Mr. Britain, where the British pound sterling is no longer the coin of the land. And 100 years ago, I would have been laughed at and called a heretic. 100 years ago, my membership consideration would be immediately revoked. My cigar would have been extinguished. My scotch or brandy would have been taken away from me. And yet just 15 years later, we saw in the advent of World War II and the end of World War II, the formation of the Bretton Woods institutions, we saw a new world order of finance. My argument is there are individuals and there are institutions and there are nation states right now using imagination to think about a different financial world order. You know, it's convenient that we don't talk about this much, but some of you may have heard about something called Project Enbridge, one of the early star pilots coming out of the BIS innovation hubs. Well, the rumors of its demise, I think, have been greatly exaggerated, quite frankly. And for those of you that are less familiar with it, I bring this up because it was a way to imagine what if we could, between agreeing nation states, figure out a way to use blockchain rails and new modern technologies and exchange wholesale CBDC transactions between nation states. And wouldn't that be a really good thing? Well, we've talked about China a lot, and of course China was at the epicenter of that particular pilot. The Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the Central Bank of Thailand, the Central Bank of the UAE. And guess what? It actually worked. And nobody really paid attention to it until the Saudis got involved. And then everybody paid attention to it, and then 6 months later, the project no longer had patronage from the BIS. Well, we're seeing in the headlines just last month that the infrastructure, the premise behind it, still exists. And the point was that this imagination and this creativity can be applied in constructive means with gathering nations here today that are aligned with the mission of this organization and those that may not be. And the reality is it doesn't matter if it was a sanctioned pilot by the BIS, because it could have been two industrial entrepreneurs in Baku coming up with the idea behind this. And this is the everything, everywhere, all at once moment that I think we need to be prepared to pay attention to. I want to speak a little bit, if I can, about a few things. One, the state of crypto today, from my perspective. I want to talk about this emerging triad just a little bit more to frame it up, and we can have conversation later about these topics. And then I want to talk about a new age of regulation that I think we're about to enter, and then maybe emphasize a little bit just how much stability is underrated, how we've gotten very spoiled with stability and the establishment that's out there. Well, to begin, the year in 2025 of crypto begins and ends with the Trump administration from my perspective. It is both a year of normalcy, where we've seen institutions, both private and public sector, come into the fold and embrace the new technologies in digital assets and crypto and tokenization. But everything, all roads in 2025 have led to Washington, D.C. in the second Trump administration. I don't know that I can possibly emphasize that more. And the results have been incredible on so many different dimensions. My concern, however, is that there's never been an industry, such as digital assets and crypto, that has invested more significantly in the outcome of a presidential election, that has been rewarded more quickly, more handsomely, more broadly, more widely than crypto. For those of you that are tennis fans out there, it has been a break of serve opportunity. So if you play the game, you like to break serve. But the break of serve is meaningless unless we consolidate this break of serve by making sure that these generations of technologies are in fact doing what they're supposed to do, that they deliver on the promise that they have yet to deliver upon, and that the regulatory reforms are not just a season in politics, but they become permanent codified law, both in the United States and abroad. I actually would argue a couple of other things. That as we think about this emerging trio of technologies, again, digital assets, of course, everybody's favorite AI or computational intelligence and quantum, that there's an increased responsibility of the people in this room to lean into these topics more. And I'll give you a great example. We talk about the Genius Act quite a bit. One of the unintended consequences in the United States, at least, is with the Genius Act becoming law, it forced every major company who was ignoring the meaningful work going on in crypto and digital assets, the responsible innovation that was taking place in payments in all of this industry. And they were able to ignore it until the Genius Act. And then all of a sudden they had to come to the realization we are really far behind. And so it's unfair for the people in this room, in our generation, if you're a leader today, for parliamentarians, for corporate executives, it's not fair, but this is the life that we have to deal with. To have to deal with a world of exponential technologies. Now, I've said that word a few times. To put that into context for everybody, just really to think about it, 30 exponential steps bumps me into that camera over there. 30 linear steps. 30 exponential steps, I'm orbiting the moon. If you let that sink in and you buy into the notion that we are truly in an exponential moment, it's incumbent upon all of us to double-click more onto some of these topics that we're facing. Right now, we have this AI bubble that many people are talking about. Whether it is or isn't, I don't know. But I do know this. How many of you have heard of ChatGPT? Have we? Show of hands. Audience participation before lunch, please. Okay? All right? So you've all heard of ChatGPT. Now, if I asked all of you who put your hand up, if you could tell me what the GPT stands for in ChatGPT, without consulting the oracle in your pocket, you might have trouble. The good news is for you, don't feel bad. The bad news for all of us is that many of the top chief technology officers can't answer that question. How do I know? I've done this in private sessions and boardrooms. Okay? We're living in a moment where we're spending and allocating billions and we don't even have the basic lexicon in play for many of these areas. I'll be brief in wrapping up my remarks on a couple of different places. I mentioned before, I think we're in a new age of regulation. For those of you that may be surfing fans, as I am, the famous classic surfing movie from the United States is The Endless Summer. And I believe we're entering an age fueled by technology and digital assets of incredible innovation, where novel products that we've never even heard of will continue to be invented and find their way into the public and into the retail setting. In other words, we're not going to have a once-a-decade chance to reset our regulatory lens. I believe that there will be an endless summer of regulation that I can speak about a little bit more perhaps in the Q&A. And I might point out that this also means that smaller jurisdictions that may not have mattered in setting the tone for global regulatory reform, with digital assets and crypto, it matters what happens in Malta. It matters what happens in Romania. It matters what happens all over the world in terms of what the future of regulation looks like because of the novel nature of these products themselves. So keep that in mind. That's the kind of moment that we're in. I think that the last thing that I would bring up before closing is that stability, again, is underrated. Underrated. We have gotten spoiled with stability. When we take a look at what the possible implications are of a BRICS, kind of Enbridge, new kind of methodology, be careful what you wish for if you're not a fan of U.S. dollar dominance. Be careful what you wish for if you're not a fan of the IMF or the World Bank or many of the other established multilateral institutions. Because that stability, this unprecedented era of human prosperity, is something that, quite frankly, I would like to see continue moving forward. We've heard a lot of things that sound dour. I am incredibly excited and optimistic about this future, but make no mistake about it. I have 5 years of Latin in me, and I've got a couple of things from that. And one of those is a quote from Caesar from Shakespeare. And the quote is simply this: I believe that the people in this room need to realize that there is this tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood can lead onto riches. Omitted, all the voyage of our lives is bound for shallows and misery. I think we are on that tide right now if we choose to take it, and I look forward to continuing the discussion with you this morning. Thank you very much.